The alarm on my wrist buzzed so hard I nearly dropped the translator earpiece. 300 delegates from 12 star systems were seated in front of me, and I had exactly one chance to stop this summit from collapsing before it began. My name is Daniel Ashford, and 6 months ago I was a linguistics professor. Now I stood on the observation deck of a coalition cruiser, humanity's first and only ambassador, trying to convince an alliance of terrified alien nations that my species was not a threat. They had every reason to be afraid. Our history recordings had already reached them. Our wars, our weapons, our films where we blow up our own cities for entertainment. The coalition had spent decades debating whether to even open a channel with Earth. When they finally did, the vote was close, and half the delegates in that room had voted against it. I needed something to break the tension, something that would show them the other side of us, the side that keeps something soft alive in our homes, and gives it a name, and lets it sleep in our beds. So I brought Biscuit. She was curled in a travel carrier at my feet, a gray tabby with white paws, utterly unaware that she was about to become the most important diplomatic gesture in human history. I had cleared it with the coalition liaison the night before, a tall, silver-skinned being named Vesa Ilorin, who represented the Threll Assembly. She had seemed amused by the idea. A small animal, she said, might be exactly the kind of soft opening this summit needed. I lifted the carrier onto the table in front of me and opened the latch. Biscuit stepped out slowly, tail low, ears swiveling at the strange hum of the ship's systems. A ripple of sound moved through the chamber, something between a gasp and a laugh, translated 100 different ways through 100 different earpieces. Delegates leaned forward. Some of them had never seen an Earth animal outside of a data file. I smiled and spoke into my own translator. "This is Biscuit," I said. "She is what we call a domestic cat. On Earth, animals like her live inside our homes. We feed them, we care for them, we let them sleep beside us. She is proof that humanity does not only build weapons, we also build gentle lives for creatures smaller than ourselves." A delegate from the Threll Assembly, a rounded being covered in soft blue fur, made a sound of delight and asked if she could approach. I nodded, and the room seemed to exhale. For a few minutes, it worked exactly the way I hoped. Biscuit wandered along the table, sniffing at unfamiliar hands, tolerating a few gentle touches. The tension in the chamber softened. Someone even asked if Earth had more animals like her, and I laughed and said we had far too many kinds to count. Then Vesa Ilorin leaned forward, and the ornament on the end of her tail caught the light. It was a small device, a thin cord ending in a cluster of glowing beads that pulsed faintly blue whenever she moved. A ceremonial piece, she had told me earlier, worn by senior diplomats of her people. It swayed gently as she shifted in her seat. Biscuit's head turned toward it instantly. I did not think anything of it at first. Cats notice movement. It is simply what they do. But I watched her body change in a way I had seen 1,000 times in my own living room, and never once thought twice about. Her ears pressed forward. Her pupils widened until her eyes looked almost black. Her weight shifted low onto her front paws, and her back end began to sway in that slow, deliberate rhythm that any cat owner would recognize as the countdown before a pounce. Across the table, a Threll xenobiologist named Corin Halveth went very still. I did not understand why until later, when he explained it to me in a quiet, careful voice. On his homeworld, there is a predator called the Ashveil, a creature responsible for more recorded losses among Threll colonists than any other single cause in their history. It is small, it is soft-looking, and it stalks its prey with that exact posture, low and coiled, right before it strikes. Biscuit pounced. It was nothing dramatic to me. She batted at the swaying ornament, missed, tumbled sideways off the edge of the table, and landed with the kind of dignity only a cat can fake immediately afterward, already washing her paw as if nothing had happened. In my living room, this would have earned a laugh and a video for my family group chat. In that chamber, It earned silence. Then chairs began scraping back. Vesa Eloran had gone rigid, her fur ornament clutched protectively against her chest. Corin Halveth was already speaking rapidly into his own translator, and though the device rendered his words calmly, I could hear the edge underneath them. Around the room, delegates from species I did not even recognize were rising from their seats, some of them retreating toward the walls, several murmuring the same phrase over and over in different languages. I did not understand what had happened. I stepped forward, hands raised, trying to explain that nothing was wrong, that this was simply how cats behaved, that it was instinct and play and nothing more. Corin Halveth turned to me, and for the first time since I had met him, his voice carried something close to fear. "You are telling us," he said slowly, "that this creature is small enough to hold in one hand, gentle enough to sleep in a child's bed, and yet it still carries the full hunting instinct of a predator, built to kill things larger than itself, and you keep it, in your homes, by choice." I opened my mouth to answer and found I did not have a good one, because he was right. Biscuit weighed perhaps 4 kilograms. She could sleep 18 hours a day. She purred when I scratched behind her ears and demanded food by headbutting my ankle at 6 in the morning. But she was also, undeniably, a hunter. Every twitch of her tail, every crouch by the window when a bird landed on the ledge, every silent stalk across the carpet toward a toy mouse, was the exact same behavior her wild ancestors used to survive. We had simply made it small. We had made it soft. We had given it a name and a bed, and let it live in our homes for thousands of years, and somewhere along the way, we had stopped seeing what it actually was. We had not removed the predator. We had only made it convenient. Vesa Eloran spoke next, her voice quieter than before, but somehow more unsettling for it. "On the Threll homeworld," she explained, "no creature with hunting instinct is ever kept close to their young. It is a foundational law of their society, older than any written record. Predators are respected from a distance and never invited inside a home. The idea of raising one beside a child, of letting it sleep in the same room, of trusting it not to act on an instinct it was born with, was not something her people had a framework for. It was not brave to them. It was not charming. It was almost incomprehensible." I tried to explain the difference, that thousands of years of breeding had shaped cats into companions, that Biscuit had never hunted anything larger than a moth in her entire life, that the instinct remained, but the intent behind it had changed. I told them about the countless nights she had simply curled against my side and slept, asking nothing more than warmth and company. But the delegates were no longer looking at me. They were looking at Biscuit, who had settled onto the table and begun cleaning her ear with one paw, utterly indifferent to the fact that she had just redefined an entire alliance's understanding of my species. The summit ended early that day, not in anger, not in argument, but in a kind of stunned recalculation that I could feel radiating through the room. Delegates left in small clusters, speaking low and fast among themselves, glancing back at the table more than once. 3 days later, the coalition sent a formal transmission to Earth's Provisional Council. I was asked to attend the reading in person, and I stood in the same chamber where it had all happened, as the message was translated aloud. Humanity, it said, had been reclassified, not as a threat, not as an enemy, something stranger. The transmission described us as a species capable of identifying an apex predator, understanding its full nature, and choosing to bring it into the most intimate parts of our lives anyway. Not out of ignorance, the message clarified, but with full knowledge of what that predator was capable of. The coalition had never encountered a civilization that did this on purpose, let alone one that had done it for thousands of years across nearly every culture on their homeworld. They were not afraid of our weapons anymore. They were afraid of our judgment, and even more curious about it. Corin Halveth requested a private meeting with me the following week. He asked, carefully, almost nervously, whether Earth had other animals like Biscuit. creatures we kept close despite what they were capable of. I told him about dogs, descendants of pack hunters that could take down animals many times their size, now sleeping at the foot of human beds and greeting children at the door with wagging tails. I told him about horses, powerful enough to kill a person with a single kick, that we rode for sport and led by hand through crowded streets. I watched his expression shift with every example, somewhere between horror and fascination, until he finally sat back and asked me the question I suspect the entire coalition wanted answered. "Are all of them like this?" he asked. "Do you tame everything?" I looked down at Biscuit, who had followed me into the meeting and was now sprawled across my lap, purring, one paw twitching gently in her sleep, chasing something only she could see. "Not tame," I told him. "Trusted." The transmission cut out shortly after that, and for a long moment, neither of us said anything else. Biscuit stretched, resettled, and went back to sleep, entirely unaware that somewhere among the stars, an entire coalition of civilizations had just decided that humanity's greatest weapon was not a warship or a weapon at all. It was our willingness to love something dangerous and call it family.